Ambassador Jake Morrison stumbled off the transport shuttle onto Station Harmony with all the grace of a three-legged elephant on roller skates. His diplomatic credentials hung crooked from his wrinkled uniform, and his bloodshot eyes screamed volumes about last night's farewell party on Earth. In one hand, he clutched a battered duffel bag. In the other, an ancient leather-bound book that had seen better decades. "Welcome to the Galactic Peace Summit," chirped the station's AI in a voice so artificially cheerful it made Jake's hangover throb harder. "Please proceed to the ceremonial greeting chamber for the traditional welcome of species." Jake shuffled through the gleaming corridors, muttering under his breath. 30 years in the diplomatic corps, and they send me to babysit a bunch of space lizards and giant bugs. Should have stayed in accounting. The ceremonial chamber was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate dozens of different alien physiologies. Unfortunately, it was also designed by committee, which meant it looked like a disco ball had mated with a greenhouse and produced something that hurt to look at directly. "Ah, the human representative," boomed a voice like grinding stone. Commander Thrak of the Skalari delegation stood 7 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from green to purple, depending on his mood. Currently, they were a distinctly unfriendly shade of crimson. "We have heard much about your species' negotiating skills." "Yeah, well, don't believe everything you hear," Jake replied, setting down his bag with a thud that echoed through the chamber. "Half of it's probably exaggerated, and the other half is classified." The Queen Bzztk of the Bzztk Empire chose that moment to make her entrance, which involved a lot of clicking, chittering, and what sounded like an angry typewriter having a nervous breakdown. Her compound eyes reflected the ceremonial lights in a way that made Jake's already queasy stomach do somersaults. "The human speaks truth words," she clicked rapidly. "Bzztk intelligence confirms human deception rates at acceptable levels for trade negotiations." "Well, that's reassuring," Jake muttered. Then noticed the ornate crystal pedestal in the center of the room. "What's the fancy paperweight for?" The chamber fell silent. Even the station's background hum seemed to quiet down, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "That," said Professor Glumbert, a gelatinous blob-like creature who spoke in the tone of someone perpetually disappointed by life, "is the sacred crystal of eternal harmony. It has maintained peace between our species for over 3 centuries. Jake squinted at the crystal, which was doing that annoying thing where it seemed to shift and dance in his peripheral vision. "Looks like a really expensive doorstop to me." He took a step closer, and that's when everything went sideways. His boot caught on the ceremonial carpet, which had been woven by blind monks from the Tau Ceti system, and was apparently as slippery as it was sacred. Jake windmilled his arms, knocked over a ceremonial chalice, and watched in slow-motion horror as his grandfather's storybook flew through the air and smacked directly into the crystal of eternal harmony. The crystal exploded in a shower of sparkles that would have been beautiful if it hadn't just triggered the biggest diplomatic incident in galactic history. "Sacred crystal is destroyed," Queen Bzztk shrieked, her clicking reaching frequencies that made nearby equipment start sparking. "Ancient blood feud is renewed." Commander Thrak's scales went from crimson to a shade of purple so dark it was practically black. "The Skalari remember the old grievances. The Bzztk will pay for their ancestors' crimes." "Now hold on," Jake said, brushing crystal dust off his uniform. "I'm pretty sure I'm the one who broke your fancy rock, not the space bugs." "The human calls us space bugs," Queen Bzztk clicked indignantly. "Additional insult to injury pain. Bzztk war fleets will darken the stars." "Skalari battleships are already en route," Thrak growled. "This station will become a battlefield." Jake looked around the chamber, which was rapidly filling with panicking aliens and flashing warning lights. "So let me get this straight. I broke your peace treaty crystal, accidentally restarted a war that's been on pause for 3 centuries, and now we're all trapped on a space station about to become ground zero for an interstellar conflict?" "That is an accurate summary," Professor Glumbert said mournfully. "We are all doomed." "Great," Jake sighed, picking up his grandfather's book from the crystal debris. "And I haven't even had my morning coffee yet." The station's emergency klaxons began wailing, and through the observation windows, Jake could see the first wave of warships dropping out of hyperspace. This was shaping up to be the worst diplomatic mission in human history, and considering humanity's track record, that was saying something. The lockdown protocols engaged with the subtle grace of a sledgehammer to the face. Blast doors slammed shut throughout Station Harmony, trapping Jake and his newfound alien frenemies in the main conference hall. The good news was that the room was designed to survive direct orbital bombardment. The bad news was that it was designed to survive direct orbital bombardment, which meant they weren't getting out anytime soon. "This is just perfect," Jake muttered, slumping into a chair that had clearly been designed for someone with a completely different spine configuration. Trapped in a room with a bunch of aliens who want to kill each other. And I'm the idiot who lit the fuse. Commander Thrak paced the length of the room like a caged predator, his claws leaving scratches in the supposedly indestructible flooring. Skalari honor demands blood for the ancient betrayal. The Bzztk will learn why we are called the Thousand Scar Warriors. Bzztk remember pain from old wars, Queen Vizzle clicked back, her antennae twitching with agitation. Skalari broke treaty words first. Bzztk have long memory banks for grudge keeping. Oh, wonderful. Professor Glumbert oozed across the floor, leaving a trail of what Jake really hoped was just condensation. Not only are we trapped, but we're trapped with the two most stubborn species in the galaxy. We're definitely doomed now. Captain Zara, the four-armed Exian security chief, was frantically working at a communication console with the efficiency of someone who had clearly dealt with diplomatic disasters before. "I can't reach my ship," she announced, her voice carrying the kind of calm that came from years of dealing with impossible situations. "Station communications are jammed, and the automated defense systems are treating everyone as potential hostiles." Jake pulled out his emergency flask, took a sip of something that tasted like liquid regret, and surveyed his companions. "So let me see if I've got this right. We've got a lizard person who wants to start a war, a bug queen who's equally eager to fight, a pessimistic blob who thinks we're all going to die, and a security chief who can't call for backup. Meanwhile, I'm the human who caused this whole mess by tripping over a rug and breaking the galaxy's most important paperweight." "That is an accurate assessment," Captain Zara confirmed. "Though I would add that both fleets are now in weapons range and showing significant energy buildups consistent with pre-combat charging sequences." "Wonderful," Jake said, taking another sip from his flask. "How long do we have before they start shooting?" "Based on standard fleet protocols, approximately 2 hours," Zara replied. "Less, if either commander decides to open fire early." Queen Vizzle began making a sound like a broken air conditioner. Bzztk battle doctrine requires immediate response to Skalari aggression. Queen Mother will be greatly displeased if royal daughter dies in disgrace. Shame. "Skalari warriors do not die in disgrace," Thrak snarled. "We die in glorious battle, taking our enemies with us to the warrior's rest." "Oh, that's just fantastic," Jake muttered. "The lizard wants to go out in a blaze of glory. The bug queen is worried about disappointing her mother. And we're all going to be vaporized because I have the coordination of a drunk rhinoceros." Professor Glumbert made a sound like deflating balloons. "This is worse than the Great Dissolution of 2387. At least then we had warning before everything went catastrophically wrong." Jake looked around the room again, noting the blast-proof walls, the emergency rations that looked like they'd been designed by someone who had never actually eaten food, and the growing sound of weapons charging outside. "You know what the really frustrating part is? I was supposed to retire next month. 30 years of keeping humans from accidentally starting wars with ourselves, and now I'm going to die because I finally succeeded in starting one with everybody else." "Human pessimism is noted," Queen Vizzle clicked. "However, Bzztk have superior pessimism levels. We assume worst-case scenarios in all situations." "That's not pessimism. That's just good planning," Captain Zara observed while continuing to work on the communication systems. "Though in this case, the worst-case scenario appears to be becoming reality." Commander Thrak stopped pacing and fixed Jake with a stare that could have melted steel. "Human, your species is known for cunning and deception. Surely you have some plan to escape this situation." Jake laughed, a sound with about as much humor as a funeral dirge. "My plan was to show up, shake some hands, sign some papers, and go home. I'm a diplomat, not a miracle worker. The closest thing I have to a cunning plan is this flask of bourbon, and a book of fairy tales my grandfather left me." "Fairy tales?" Professor Glumbert perked up slightly, which for a gelatinous blob meant he stopped actively dripping. Are these tactical narratives designed to convey strategic information? Not unless you count the strategic importance of not accepting food from strangers or the tactical advantages of having a really good pair of running shoes, Jake replied, patting the worn leather cover of his grandfather's book. Outside, the sound of charging weapons grew louder, and Jake was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, his grandfather's old stories might be the last thing he'd ever read. The low hum of charging weapons had escalated to a bone-deep thrumming that made the station's walls vibrate like a tuning fork. Jake could feel it in his teeth, his bones, and his already queasy stomach. Through the reinforced windows, the space around Station Harmony was filling with warships that looked like they'd been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. "Energy signatures are off the charts," Captain Zara announced, her forearms working frantically across multiple control panels. "Both fleets are charging planet killers. At this rate, they'll have enough firepower to crack this station like an egg in about 40 minutes. Planet killers? Jake nearly choked on his bourbon. They brought planet killers to a peace summit? Skalari military doctrine requires overwhelming force for all diplomatic engagements. Commander Thrak explained matter-of-factly while using his claws to carve what looked like battle strategies into the conference table. How else would you ensure the other side takes you seriously? Bzztk concur with force projection philosophy. Queen Bzztk clicked rapidly. Diplomatic words carry more weight mass when backed by sufficient firepower destruction. "You people are insane," Jake muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, you beings are insane. I don't want to add species discrimination to my list of diplomatic failures today." Professor Glumbert had begun secreting what appeared to be writing fluid onto the wall, etching out symbols that looked disturbingly like a last will and testament. "I am documenting our final moments for any potential survivors. Though given the destructive capacity currently aimed at this station, survival probability approaches 0. Will you stop being so cheerful about our impending doom?" Jake snapped. "Some of us are trying to maintain a little optimism here." "Optimism is statistically irrelevant when facing overwhelming firepower," Glumbert replied, continuing his slimy scribbling. "Though I suppose denial is a common response to imminent death." Commander Thrak had moved on from carving the table to sharpening his claws on the reinforced walls, creating a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard if fingernails were made of diamond and the chalkboard was made of suffering. "A warrior's death is preferable to a diplomat's surrender. When the shooting begins, I will die as befits a Skalari of the Crimson Scale." "Death glory is overrated," Queen Bzztk chittered, though she was now laying what appeared to be stress eggs in the corner of the room. "Bzztk prefer survival continuation to honor death. But if death ending is inevitable, then royal dignity must be maintained." Jake watched this alien breakdown with a mixture of fascination and horror. The 7-foot lizard warrior was preparing for his final battle against impossible odds. The insect queen was stress-laying eggs while maintaining her royal composure. The gelatinous professor was writing his memoir in slime on the wall. And sure enough, the four-armed security chief was systematically trying every communication protocol in the book, while maintaining the kind of professional calm that probably came from years of dealing with cosmic-level stupidity. "This is ridiculous," Jake said, pulling out his grandfather's storybook and flipping through pages worn soft by decades of reading. "Here I am, about to die in the stupidest way possible, and all I've got for company is a lizard with a death wish, a bug with mommy issues, a blob with depression, and a security chief who's too professional to panic properly." "Human psychological breakdown noted," Queen Bzztk observed. "Stress response involves insult delivery and alcohol consumption. Fascinating behavioral patterns." "I am not having a breakdown," Jake protested, then realized he was talking to a book. "Okay, maybe I'm having a small breakdown. But can you blame me? This morning I was a semi-competent diplomat with a drinking problem. Now I'm the guy who accidentally restarted the bloodiest war in galactic history." The weapons charging reached a new crescendo, and the lights flickered ominously. Professor Glumbert looked up from his wall writing. "Electromagnetic interference from the fleet weapons is affecting station power systems. We have perhaps 30 minutes before they reach firing capacity." 30 minutes, Jake repeated, staring at the familiar pages of fairy tales that had been his bedtime companions as a child. 30 minutes to live, and the only thing I have left from home is a book of stories about talking animals and magic beans. Commander Thrak paused in his claw sharpening. Your species tells stories of talking animals? Are these tactical manuals disguised as entertainment? What? No. They're just stories. You know, for kids. Once upon a time, happily ever after, that sort of thing. Bzztk are confused by narrative concept. Queen Vizzle clicked. Stories serve what purpose function, if not for tactical education or historical record? Jake looked around the room at his fellow trapped beings, all of whom were coping with their impending doom in their own special ways, and felt something that might have been inspiration if it weren't so desperate. You know what? Maybe that's exactly what we need right now. A story. Because reality is doing such a bang-up job for us so far. Human logic patterns are deteriorating, Professor Glumbert observed. Storytelling is unlikely to affect our current tactical situation. Yeah, well, Jake said, opening to the first page of his grandfather's book. At this point, what have we got to lose? Jake cleared his throat and looked around the room at his audience of doomed aliens. Okay, since we're all going to die anyway, and since talking about military strategy and imminent doom isn't exactly improving the mood, how about I read you a story? Human has experienced complete psychological breakdown, Queen Vizzle observed clinically. Storytelling behavior indicates denial response to reality death. Maybe, Jake admitted, but I figure if I'm going to spend my last 30 minutes alive, I might as well do something that doesn't involve listening to you all argue about who's going to die more gloriously. Commander Thrak paused in his weapon preparations. Your species' tactical narratives may contain useful information about human combat doctrine. Trust me, these aren't tactical anything, Jake said, finding a story he remembered from childhood. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks who had absolutely no concept of personal boundaries or basic home security awareness. He began reading, but years of diplomatic training and natural sarcasm crept into his delivery. So Goldilocks is wandering through the forest, which is already a questionable life choice, when she comes across a house that clearly belongs to someone else. Does she knock? Does she call out to see if anyone's home? Of course not. She just waltzes right in like she owns the place. Professor Glumbert stopped writing his will and turned a pseudopod toward Jake. The human protagonist displays concerning disregard for property rights and basic social protocols. Oh, it gets better, Jake continued. She finds 3 bowls of porridge. The first one's too hot, the second one's too cold, but the third one is just right, so naturally she eats the whole thing. Because when you're committing breaking and entering, you might as well add theft to the list. Queen Vizzle's clicking had slowed to a more contemplative rhythm. Goldilocks' creature shows poor tactical assessment. Should have sampled all food sources before consuming any completely. Basic survival protocol violation. See? You get it, Jake said, warming to his audience. Then she finds 3 chairs. The first one's too hard, the second one's too soft, but the third one's just right. So she sits in it and breaks it completely. Because apparently Goldilocks has the same approach to furniture that I have to intergalactic diplomacy. Commander Thrak actually stopped sharpening his claws. The destruction of the chair was accidental? Completely, Jake confirmed. She was just trying to sit down and relax after her successful burglary, and whoops, there goes the furniture. Sound familiar? The parallel to current circumstances is noteworthy, Thrak admitted. Jake flipped the page. But wait, it gets even more ridiculous. After eating their food and breaking their furniture, Goldilocks decides she's tired, so she goes upstairs to try out their beds. Because why not complete the home invasion experience? Captain Zara looked up from her communication attempts. She entered their sleeping quarters? That's a severe security breach. What kind of species allows such vulnerable domestic arrangements? Bears, Jake said. The homeowners were bears. 3 of them. Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. And yes, they could talk. Because apparently in fairy tale land, basic biology is more of a suggestion than a rule. Bears? Queen Vizzle's clicking reached a pitch that could have shattered glass. Large predator species with significant combat capability? Goldilocks' creature invaded predator territory? Yep. And predictably, while she's testing out their beds, trying to find one that's just right. The bears come home from their walk in the woods to find their house ransacked and some blonde kid passed out in Baby Bear's bed. Professor Glumbert had completely abandoned his wall writing and was now fully focused on the story. The tactical situation has reversed. Goldilocks is now trapped in hostile territory with angry predators between her and escape routes. Exactly, Jake said, surprised by how engaged his audience had become. So the bears are understandably upset. Papa Bear is all someone's been eating my porridge, in his great big bear voice. Mama Bear chimes in with someone's been sitting in my chair. And Baby Bear is like someone broke my chair and ate all my porridge and is sleeping in my bed right now. The bears demonstrate proper home security assessment protocols, Commander Thrak observed approvingly. They identified the breach, cataloged the damage, and located the intruder efficiently. Right? Much better tactical awareness than Goldilocks showed, Jake agreed. So naturally, Goldilocks wakes up to find 3 angry bears staring at her, realizes that her life choices have led her to this moment, and does the only sensible thing she's done this entire story. Negotiates for peaceful resolution, suggested Captain Zara. Attempts to establish diplomatic communication, offered Queen Vizzle. Prepares for honorable combat, hoped Commander Thrak. Nope, Jake grinned. She jumps out the window and runs away as fast as she can, never to be seen again. The room fell silent except for the ominous humming of charging weapons outside. Then Professor Glumbert spoke up in a tone of wonder. The resolution is completely unsatisfying from a narrative standpoint. No justice, no consequences, no character growth. Just escape? Sometimes, Jake said, closing the book, the best tactical solution is to run away and hope you never have to deal with the consequences of your terrible decisions. Ha, said Commander Thrak thoughtfully. That's actually not bad advice. The communication system suddenly crackled to life, and 2 very different but equally intimidating faces appeared on the main screen. Admiral Bzztk of the Skalari fleet looked like Commander Thrak's bigger, angrier brother, while Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk of the Bzztk Armada had compound eyes that could probably see through several dimensions at once. Commander Thrak, Admiral Bzztk hissed, his scales a deep crimson that suggested he was ready to turn the entire sector into a smoking crater. Report on the diplomatic situation. Yes, report needed, buzzed Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk, her voice like 1,000 angry hornets. Bzztk fleet minds are eager for combat resolution. Commander Thrak looked at Jake, then at the storybook, then back at his commanding officer. Admiral, the human was just sharing tactical narratives, stories that contain strategic wisdom. Stories? Admiral Bzztk's eyes narrowed to slits. What manner of tactical intelligence are these humans providing? Jake realized he was now the center of attention for 2 planet-killing fleets in a room full of aliens who'd somehow become invested in fairy tales. Well, I was just reading about this girl named Goldilocks who made some questionable tactical decisions regarding bear territory. Bears? Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk's antennae twitched with interest. Large predator species? Continue narrative description. So Jake found himself retelling Goldilocks to 2 fleet commanders who could vaporize solar systems before lunch. But as he spoke, he noticed something interesting happening. The weapons charging sounds were getting quieter, and both commanders were leaning forward, clearly engrossed in the tale. The bears' security protocols were adequate, Admiral Bzztk admitted when Jake finished. But their response time was poor. They should have detected the intrusion immediately. Bzztk concur with security assessment, buzzed the Supreme Hive Mind. However, Goldilocks' creature showed impressive adaptability. Quick escape when situation became untenable. Jake looked at his grandfather's book and had what was either a brilliant idea or a suicidal impulse. You know, I've got another story about tactical intelligence gathering and strategic deception. It's called Little Red Riding Hood. Continue with tactical narrative, both commanders said simultaneously, then glared at each other for speaking in unison. Jake opened to another familiar page. Okay, so there's this little girl who's been tasked with a supply run to her grandmother's house. Simple mission, right? Walk through the woods, deliver food supplies, maintain family communications. But command failed to brief her on the local predator situation. Poor intelligence preparation. Admiral Bzztk observed. What were the environmental hazards? A wolf, Jake said. Big, smart, and hungry. Classic apex predator with above-average intelligence and a talent for psychological manipulation. Wolves are pack hunters, Queen Vizzle clicked. Solitary wolf indicates either exile status or advanced tactical thinking. Definitely advanced tactical thinking, Jake confirmed, because this wolf doesn't just attack Little Red Riding Hood directly. Instead, he engages her in casual conversation, gets her to reveal her mission parameters, destination, and timeline. Classic intelligence gathering. Supreme hive mind Bzztka's compound eyes glittered with interest. Wolf creature used social engineering techniques, aggressive adaptation. Oh, it gets better, Jake continued. The wolf takes the information Little Red gave him and uses it to outflank her. He takes a faster route to the grandmother's house, arrives first, and deals with the primary obstacle to his mission. Deals with how? Commander Thrak asked, his warrior instincts clearly engaged. Eats the grandmother, Jake said matter-of-factly. Then, and this is the clever part, he disguises himself as the grandmother and waits for Little Red to arrive, planning to eliminate her too. Excellent tactical deception, Admiral Bzztk hissed approvingly. The wolf demonstrated superior planning and adaptability. But here's where it gets interesting, Jake said, really getting into the story now. Little Red arrives at the house and immediately knows something's wrong. The wolf's disguise is good, but not perfect. So she starts asking questions. Grandmother, what big eyes you have. Grandmother, what big teeth you have. Standard security verification protocols, Captain Zara noted with professional interest. Exactly. She's trying to confirm the identity of the person she's supposed to be meeting. But the wolf, overconfident in his disguise, plays along instead of just ending the operation quietly. Classic villain mistake, Professor Glumbert observed, excessive confidence leading to tactical error. Right. So when Little Red asks grandmother, what big teeth you have, the wolf can't resist the dramatic reveal. All the better to eat you with. And he jumps out of bed to attack. Premature revelation of hostile intent. Supreme hive mind Bzztk clicked disapprovingly. Wolf creature should have maintained deception until optimal strike position. That's what I thought too, Jake agreed. But here's the thing. While the wolf was monologuing, Little Red was screaming for help. And it turns out there was a woodsman nearby who heard the commotion. External reinforcements, Admiral Bzztk noted. The wolf failed to secure the operational area. Yep, the woodsman bursts in, sees the situation, and deals with the wolf permanently. Then he cuts open the wolf's stomach and rescues the grandmother, who was somehow still alive despite being eaten. Don't ask me to explain the biology on that one. Both fleet commanders were quiet for a moment, processing the tactical implications. Finally, Admiral Bzztk spoke. The wolf's initial strategy was sound, but he made critical errors in execution and situational awareness. Bzztk analysis concurs, buzzed Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk. Over elaborate deception plans often fail due to complexity factors. Simple direct action might have been more effective. But then again, Jake said, if the wolf had just attacked Little Red in the woods, he wouldn't have gotten the grandmother too. Sometimes the complex plan pays off, and sometimes it backfires spectacularly. Like accidentally starting an interstellar war by tripping over a rug, Commander Thrak observed. Exactly like that, Jake agreed. Jake looked around the room, then at the two fleet commanders on the screen, and realized something remarkable was happening. The weapons charging had stopped. The emergency klaxons had gone quiet. And everyone was looking at him expectantly, waiting for more stories. You know, he said slowly, I've got a whole book of these tactical narratives. Stories about clever insects, wise animals, strategic thinking, and creative problem solving. Bzztk require insect stories, Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk declared immediately. Insect tactics are of primary interest to hive minds. Skalari prefer predator narratives, Admiral Bzztk countered. Stories of hunting strategy and combat wisdom. I've got both, Jake said, flipping through his grandfather's book. There's this one about a spider who outsmarts a fly through superior web engineering, and another about a clever fox who uses psychological warfare against a crow. Spider engineering tactics? Queen Vizzle clicked excitedly. Bzztk have much to learn from arachnid strategies. Fox warfare techniques. Commander Thrak perked up. Skalari warriors could benefit from such knowledge. Jake found himself in the surreal position of conducting diplomatic negotiations through fairy tale analysis with two alien fleets that had been ready to blow up the galaxy 20 minutes ago. Well, I suppose we could arrange some kind of cultural exchange program. Regular story-sharing sessions, tactical narrative analysis, that sort of thing. Acceptable proposal, Admiral Bzztk said after a moment's consideration. Skalari fleet will power down weapons to facilitate educational exchange. Bzztk concur with story-sharing agreement, Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk buzzed. Cultural learning opportunities outweigh combat benefits in current situation. Professor Glumbert stopped dripping and stared at Jake in amazement. You've just negotiated a ceasefire through children's stories. This is either the most brilliant diplomatic strategy ever devised or the most ridiculous accident in galactic history. Probably both, Jake admitted, watching the weapon signatures on Captain Zara's displays dropping to safe levels. Though to be fair, I think we can all agree that my grandfather's bedtime stories are a significant improvement over my usual diplomatic approach. Human storytelling abilities demonstrate unexpected tactical value, Queen Vizzle observed. Perhaps Earth culture has more strategic worth than initially assessed. The Galactic Council will need to hear about this development, Captain Zara said, finally managing to establish communications with the outside universe. A new form of cultural diplomacy based on narrative sharing could revolutionize interspecies relations. Jake looked down at his grandfather's worn leather book and shook his head in wonder. Grandpa Joe always said these stories were important, but I don't think he ever imagined they'd prevent an interstellar war. Your grandfather was a wise human, Commander Thrak said respectfully. His tactical narratives have saved countless lives today. What is your designation for this new diplomatic position? Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk asked. Bzztk require proper terminology for record keeping. Jake considered this. How about cultural ambassador? It sounds better than guy who accidentally broke everything and then fixed it with fairy tales. Ambassador Morrison of Earth, Admiral Bzztk said formally. The Skalari fleet acknowledges your diplomatic authority in matters of story-based cultural exchange. Bzztk fleet minds concur with story ambassador recognition, added Supreme Hive Mind Bzztk. Regular narrative sessions will be scheduled for tactical education purposes. Jake looked around the conference room, which an hour ago had been a death trap, and was now apparently the headquarters of the galaxy's first fairy tale diplomacy program. Professor Glumbert was already making notes about the unprecedented success of narrative-based conflict resolution. Queen Vizzle was clicking excitedly about setting up story translation protocols for the Bzztk hive minds. Commander Thrak was discussing the strategic implications of the Three Little Pigs with his admiral. And Captain Zara was efficiently organizing the logistics of what was probably going to become the most unusual peace treaty in galactic history. You know what the really crazy part is? Jake said, pulling out his emergency flask for a celebratory drink. I actually think this might work. I mean, if you can get people to stop shooting at each other long enough to argue about whether the Wolf and Little Red Riding Hood should have used a more direct tactical approach, maybe there's hope for the rest of us. Story diplomacy shows significant promise, Professor Glumbert agreed, no longer sounding like he expected the universe to end at any moment. Though I suspect the Galactic Council will have difficulty believing this report. Let them, Jake said, raising his flask in a toast. To my grandfather Joe, who always said that a good story could change the world. Turns out he was right, he just didn't specify which world. He took a sip of bourbon and looked out at the space around Station Harmony, where two massive fleets were now exchanging cultural data files instead of weapons fire. Of course, now I have to figure out how to explain to my superiors that I've just founded an entirely new branch of diplomacy based on talking animals and magic beans. This is either going to get me promoted or committed to a psychiatric facility. Possibly both, Captain Zara observed with what might have been amusement. Though given the results, I'd say the psychiatric evaluation can wait until after the victory celebration. Jake Morrison, formerly humanity's most reluctant diplomat and now the galaxy's first story ambassador, settled back in his uncomfortable chair and opened his grandfather's book to find the next tale. Outside, the stars were no longer in danger of being shot out of the sky, and inside, a room full of former enemies were eagerly waiting to hear about the tactical implications of Jack and the Beanstalk. It wasn't exactly the retirement he'd been planning, but it definitely beat being vaporized by alien death rays. And who knew? Maybe there really was something to this whole happily ever after thing after all.